Good evening, everyone. It is 7:31 on Wednesday, April 26th. We're going to start with the pledge and then we will start with our meeting. the work session. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. No, this is not. There it goes. Okay, do we have announcements to my right, sir?
One. Should I begin?
Yes, please.
Good evening, Ossining. This is Deputy Mayor Lopez here. This is my camera. Yeah. Thanks. So I want to recognize a passing this week, Harry Belafonte, that died at the age of 96. He had a particular connection to this community of Ossining, where he regularly came to visit the incarcerated men in Sing Sing, where he would often bring very famous actors and singers, and always accompanied with very famous people. And the reason was twofold. One was to give the incarcerated men there an opportunity to experience something different, to show them that their worst mistake doesn't define them, and that someone believed in them, and that they deserve to have the opportunity to experience something like that. And secondly, it was to expose these very famous people to the incarcerated men and what was going on in Sing Sing, some of which was very progressive with respect to prisons in terms of programs and so forth, but also just to humanize them. And someone that took the time and care to lift up a part of our community in that way over so many years, I very much appreciate and want to recognize. Of course, that's in addition to all of the music and movies and cultural significance that Mr. Belafonte had. So I want to recognize him and thank him for his contribution.
Manny? No? Okay, you're very far away from the mic. So I just wanted to remind folks that we have a fun event for the spring, which is the Arbor Day event this Friday, 10:30, at what we lovingly call the bus stop, but it's Waller and what's across street? Spring. And we are looking forward to having a trio from our own Ossining School perform. And mostly we will be planting some trees because we're a tree city, so is the town, and this is a joint effort. We will do as we did last year and really celebrate the spring, celebrate trees. Trees are super important. They actually give us a lot of oxygen. They take dirt in and they spew out great air. So they're important. They're especially important in urban areas, but they're really important throughout the state. So we're excited about that. We will also be honoring a person who had a tremendous amount of input, a tremendous amount of push for women and for minorities, specifically African Americans in Westchester County. Reggie Lafayette, who worked at the county, was involved in one of the political parties, but really had a tremendous amount of push. He passed away about a year ago, but we want to honor him here this spring with a tree in his honor. I also want to do a big shout out to Susie Ross and her team of Green Ossining. And all of the who knows how many people work. I know the staff here work diligently. So making the festival, the event from Green Ossining for Earth Day on Saturday, the weather was just magnificent. I got my first burn of the summer, but everything played in their favor. And Susie Ross, I think it's been 13 years, has really put on this event that's grown from a small celebration to the largest county-wide event for by Green Ossining, the village, the town, the police, the fire, the small businesses that are there, the educational forums, the all of the singers and performers, the kids, the professionals, all of whom chip in. I feel like I'm forgetting something. I don't know who. Ambulance Corps. It's like literally everybody really participates. Obviously, we want to do a shout out to Bill Garrison, who I saw there as well from the community center, who really helps put it all together. I am loath to name names because truly it's a team effort. So I really very much appreciate it. I know a bunch of the board members were there to enjoy the day. I thought I would be there for 3 hours or so. I ended up being there the whole day because I was honestly just having too much fun. And it was great. And our e-bike folks were there answering a lot of questions. So all in all, I thought it was just terrific. And now I think we can start with the work session.
Good evening, everybody.
Hello.
Thank you. So first on our agenda, we're going to be talking about our community engagement plan to make the community more aware of our downtown revitalization initiative projects. And we're going to be doing a lot of different things, but we're going to be starting with webinars as well as other engagement different ways, meeting with people and old school flyers and a whole bunch of ways to make sure that we get as many people involved in input for the DRI projects and everybody knows what's going on. So with that, I'd like to start the presentation. Jamie, could you pull it up, please? You have to excuse me, my allergies are like, so I feel like I'm allergic to everything.
Everybody's suffering.
So,
We're in good company.
okay, good. So, as I mentioned, we're talking about community engagement for what's happening downtown. So starting next week, we're going to be starting a series called Transitional Thursdays, or is that what transformational Thursdays? I'm sorry. I knew that was wrong, but Transformational Thursdays. Not a great alliteration, but we're working on it. And starting on Thursday nights between now and or next week and the end of July, we're going to be talking about different aspects of our downtown revitalization initiative. So starting next week, 6 p.m., tune in. We'll make sure you have all the information. You can learn about our downtown revitalization initiative projects, along with other projects that we're doing in conjunction, and that would be the narrowing of Route 9, or Route 9 road diet, as well as our 5 corner renovations there at the intersection of Main Street and Spring Street and Brandreth and Central Avenue. And we'll be talking about everything that we're doing to give everybody a good sense of what's going on for those projects. And there'll be opportunities to ask questions. Next slide, please. All right. Jamie?
Yeah, well, I'm texting with her.
Oh, okay.
So I think Jamie's gonna stop sharing the screen and then
Oh, okay.
switch over to the not presenter view.
Because it puts up the notes, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's just smaller, and so it's harder to see. I think all the notes are right there inside Karen.
Yeah, somewhere. Maybe.
Yeah. there you go.
So, anyway, and here we go. So, okay, next slide, please. Following our overview on Transformational Thursday, May 11th, we will be doing another webinar. These all start at 6 p.m. and then they'll be on our website as well. So you'll be able to look at them afterwards if you don't see them live. But we'll be talking about community center, the renovations on the community center. So we'll talk about a little bit about where we are with the pool renovations, but we'll also talk about the planning that's going to start for the renovation of the entire site, which is quite exciting. And we would love a lot of community involvement into how we can transform that space into more functional space, more usable space, more dynamic space, more inviting space for the future of Ossining, so that we can have even more robust programs for families and youth and seniors and people of all ages. So that's going to be starting as well. And again, you'll have opportunity to ask questions and we'll give more detail on that Downtown Revitalization Initiative project. Next slide, please. So one of the biggest impediments to revitalizing Main Street, or really redeveloping some of the surface parking lots that are village owned there, that were, where buildings were demolished during urban renewal, has been the fact that we park there. And if we've developed them, you might not have anywhere to park. And over the years, we've talked about a parking structure that would be located behind, in the Brandworth parking lots, behind where Open Door is now, Main Street Deli. So we'll be talking about this project and why a parking garage doesn't necessarily seem transformational in and of itself. Doing this, creating this parking structure, which we do want to be forward-looking, with potential for adaptive reuse in the future if we no longer have such a high parking demand, which ability to have a e-bike kiosk and rent bicycles and all sorts of fun things. We'll talk about this project, what it means for the community, and why this is really the important first step of being able to successfully redevelop Main Street. And that will be on Thursday, June 1st, and again, 6 p.m. And people can tune in, ask questions, and we will then post these online with a running list of frequently asked questions. Next slide, please. Thursday, June 8th, we'll be talking about Market Square, which is the heart of downtown. And really, I know it took me a little while too.
I thought it was something to do with the number 3, and I was like, I'll find
So,
out.
so we're
That's that aging millennial influence coming out.
we're trying to appeal to everybody. So people of all ages, but
Elder millennial.
elder millennial.
An elder millennial, okay.
So we do try to get creative when we can. But we all have grown to love Market Square. So even though that used to be populated with building and shops and apartments, there is a great commitment. We definitely heard that loud and clear from the community to keep Market Square as an open space. So what we are going to do now that we have gotten money, $2 million from the DRI to redevelop that space, to look at the entire space, again, remove some of the parking and make the space more inviting, more dynamic, all sorts of things that we can think about in terms of stages or kiosks or, ways to make it more inviting, ways to make it more useful, and ways to make it really the heart of our community as an outdoor gathering space. So we'll be talking about that in more detail on Thursday, June 8th. Next slide, please. So although the development of a mixed-use property, and this would be on the parking lots that are adjacent to the post office on Spring, at the corner of Spring and Main Street. Although this is not a DRI funded project, it is part of the discussion that we've had with the state on downtown revitalization. And one of the reasons they have funded the parking garage and the Market Square project, because it was in the anticipation of doing a mixed-use project that would have a certain amount of housing and retail space, and again, repopulate that side of the street, which was with what was there originally, allowing for more businesses, allowing for some housing, and really allowing for a greater activation on the street, and more people there every day to shop and work and live in Ossining and patronize the businesses that are there already, as create opportunities for new businesses to thrive. So this, we will be at this meeting on Thursday, June 22nd, we'll have the developers there, and we'll be able to really talk about the concept and engage people in what they might want to see within that concept, and get people's ideas about the types of housing and retail and features they may want incorporated in that building. It is planned to be a mixed use building, but there's always room for public opinion and public engagement around it. So that will be also talking about all these projects and other venues too, but this will be the live webinar that will then live in perpetuity on our website on Thursday, June 22nd at 6 o'clock. And then on Thursday, July 13th, we'll be also talking about this project. Next slide, please. Because this is a big deal, and we really want to make sure we have community input on this. We will also be talking about other features, design features of the building, architectural design. It is intended that this building will be reflective of the architectural design on the street already. It is our historic district, as well as how this building fits in terms of traffic flow, an integration of green design and decarbonization strategies so that we can make it a truly environmentally sustainable and efficient building, as well as how these things work together in context with the other developments that we're doing. Because really, all of the DRI projects are designed to work collectively to activate downtown revitalization. So we think we have a really nice array of projects that complement each
Is
other.
that the same corner, those two pictures?
It's not quite the same corner, so I think we might have to, fix that because we have a different
It
picture,
just
so,
implies something that I think is.
yeah, I think
But if I may, do you want us to let you finish, or can we ask?
you can ask questions.
We have seen this already. I think we all have. So just a couple of things. There are a couple of meetings that are 2 hours. Everything else is an hour and a half. I'm assuming that was purposeful, but I don't know why the previous one was 2 hours and the rest. So far, they're an hour and a half.
Yeah, I think the only one that was the 6 to 8 time slot was the first
Yeah.
spring on Main, because we anticipated a lot of questions on that one, but
So when you publicize, and if this is how we're putting the information out, then we need to do it maybe now. And I didn't pick this up earlier today when I commented. I think it has to say it's going to be 6 p.m. It's a 7:30, and in parentheses, it will end. It could end sooner because we've done these before and people come on later, but we already got off because. we were
Right.
done. So I just, because it's on Zoom and people do tend to say, okay, so if it's, I'll go in at 7 and see, but we were done. So I think you do have to say to people, like, some kind of wording that says when we're done, we're finished.
Well, you know what we
It
could
may
do?
not
We could
take
just
2
say they
hours.
start at 6 o'clock and, maybe leave it more open-ended, because I'm not even sure, depending on how long the presentation is, we don't really envision these. So I'm not entirely sure that we're going to need 2 hours on anything, but certainly if we did have on any of these, if we had a lot, well, we're going to do it till the questions are finished unless it goes on unreasonably. And then we'll set up a whole nother time to
Right.
address something that, if something that intensive.
I want to
So,
come up with words no more than 90 minutes, but I'm just saying on Zoom, unlike,
Yeah.
people do come in when they come in.
and then if they come in later and you're not there, you're like
Well, they
sitting
get
there and
upset
don't, yeah.
Because you said.
And there were times where we didn't have anybody. We got through the presentation and then we
We all
okay.
looked at each other and said, okay, so we're done. What do we do? But this is a little bit, I think, deceiving in some way on one hand, because you think you're looking at the same place, but it's
Yeah,
not.
that picture we can
But on the
switch
other
out.
hand, what I really like about it is what others have said on this board, which I didn't really, and I don't remember. It was one of these guys, I don't remember which one, said, we only have half a downtown. It's like because you go down the hill, the right side is where we take all the pictures. What would be obvious when you talk about why you would want to build, and it doesn't matter to me whether it's housing or retail at this point, but like why you want to build, it's not that you're building, you're actually are keeping the historic part. I would say somewhere when you do the presentation, not in this, is that except for Verizon and, lots, you don't have a lot of stuff on the other side of the street. And this actually is a more balanced approach, but doesn't have to be in this part. But I think the picture actually makes it clear that there used to be
Yeah,
trees on both sides. And the rendition neither accomplishes that, nor is it the same.
yeah. So
But it does remind me to bring that up to your attention if there's a way to bring that into.
I
the
think that
subject.
I know that we have pictures of it newly demolished. I'm not sure. We'll have to check with Dana. I think we
But
should
also
have
just-
pictures. So
Well, I have pictures, many pictures of that corner before it was demolished, which I think is what we want to see, right?
yes,
What was there?
I want to show the same.
Yes.
That was the crochet building and there was stuff across, there were. Yeah, I can, if you need anything, let me know. I got it.
we could use that picture.
Okay,
Okay,
God
thank
is
you.
speaking. It's like God is speaking.
I know.
God.
Yeah, because we can't see you and all of a sudden you get like, oh, Okay. so
all right.
anyway, you can Go on, I just wanted
Okay.
to.
Thank you. That was very helpful. So next slide, please. So on July 20th, we're going to be talking about the return on investment. Because this is, people will want to know, this is a lot of projects. We did get a lot of grant money, but we're going to be spending money too. We have developers investing. We want to know what the return on the investment is going to be. So we'll be talking about this in terms of what the impact is on the village budget. We'll be talking about payment in lieu of taxes agreements, the making sure that any of those agreements would have to be a win-win for both the municipality as well as the developer, that those are not one-way streets. We'll talk about the economic and community benefits, which are really the impetus for the Downtown Revitalization Initiative. It really is an economic development initiative. And then we'll also talk about the project construction timetable. And this will be an opportunity to discuss. We're going to be having a lot of discussions with local businesses there in tandem with this, more specifically to address very specific concerns about what are we going to do during the construction? How will it affect my business? How will, we'll get that out too. But this will be an opportunity for people to ask questions about development, the construction timetable, what that's going to look like and how we're going to manage that. And then finally, next slide, please. We're going to really talk about sort of bringing us back to the original presentation where we're talking about things more collectively, but talking about the importance of how these all connect and how they're linked and how they're really, the ideal is to create not just benefits for the downtown area, but really benefits that will have an immediate ripple effect to all of Ossining and will also help to promote activity on Croton Avenue and investment in places where the village may not own property, but the village has now become a more attractive place to invest for other people. So we're excited about that. And we really want to be able to address this because this isn't just a downtown initiative. It's an Ossining wide. It's to a certain extent, it's a regional initiative that we should address because we also are bringing a lot of attention to things that are very unique to Ossining. So in the center of town, you have our historic double arches, the Sing Sing Hill Greenway, the Aqueduct Trail, all intersect basically at Main Street in the community center where most of this activity is being. Those are really great placemaking features that we have that can be enhanced and brought forth as very, very unique to Ossining. And then the connectivity to the riverfront. So we'll talk a little bit about the riverfront development as well as it's a smaller project for the DRI, but the streetscaping that we'll be doing down in Station Plaza, which again, we'll probably be talking about all of these projects differently. And I think I mentioned, and if I didn't, forgive me, at the first meeting, we'll be introducing our story map too, which will be an interactive project landscape of everything that we're doing where people can visit it and we can promote it and push it out and update it. We'll be updating it regularly, but people can, scroll around and focus on things that they're interested in and get a better visual of what these projects are about, what they're going to look like, and where they are actually situated in the village of Ossining. So, and that's something that's been brought up by the board as a really important feature. So people understand how these projects integrate, how they work for collective impact throughout the community. So in parallel, though, we will be doing a lot of other outreach as well. So we plan to be, whether it's board members or staff and maybe some of the volunteers from our placemaking committees or other committees will be at the farmers market. We're thinking a minimum of 6 weeks, 6 Saturdays between now and the end of the summer. We're going to be conducting walking tours where the board with staff assisting can walk. The mayor and I did a short one the other day on Friday. It went really well. So it's a good way to get some exercise as well as get a different perspective on how this is going to all come together. And then we'll also be doing project-specific in-person series. So with the community center, the Recreation Advisory Board, I know is very interested in making sure that they use their ways to get people involved and have things at the community center where they can talk really specifically. So this will be an iterative process. There'll be a lot of paths that we go. We'll be talking to, we'll make sure that we're talking, especially in neighborhoods where there may be some direct impact because of the specific project that we're working on, that we're addressing those needs as well as broader needs and interests of the community. And as we go, we'll probably figure out more ways to promote these and talk about these things. We've already talked about having a booth at the Village Fair. So that's an obvious one, as well as other events that are taking place over the summer. So next slide, please. So this provides just a little visual schedule of our activities and the timing and an opportunity for the board to ask more questions.
Very nice. I think my Wednesdays were all eaten up. Now I see my Thursdays are gone as well.
And Saturdays.
Well, my Saturday's are already gone, but I enjoy that part. Okay, let's open it up for, I mean, I think it lays things out. I gave you my comments earlier. The other thing that's always important to me in presentations, I know each one will be take on its own personality, depending on who's in the room, who shows up. I would just I have a couple of thoughts. I'll let everybody speak, but while it's fresh in my mind before we come back to everybody else, I think that every single session has to be a desired outcome. Some of them are going to be like, we really want to hear what you say about opinions about how, where these bricks belong, like in the Market Square. Others, we've been doing focus groups and engagement for a long time. This is not an opportunity to start from zero, from the people who happen to be at that particular meeting at this point in time, because for 5 years, we've had consultants, we have this, these are building blocks, and you sort of say that. So people have to know why they're sitting there. If it's informational, terrific, and they can ask questions specific to like, well, how does this fit in and all that, then say that. It's informational, we're sharing information. If it's because you want to know how to build a park in Market Square, because it's just a thought right now, then we should say, we're really interested. Do we need a stage? Do you need this? Or what do you want to do with it? If it's already been decided that we're doing, you know, parking garage with other things attached, you're really not asking people whether there should be a parking garage there. So those are 3 examples out of
Yep.
all that. The other thing that, well, I'm going to leave my other questions. I wanted to say that so that it's clear. And then let's start with Manny and see what thoughts. And Dana, who Trustee White's actually from home today, but we'll get to you.
Amy,
after
you could take
Omar,
that presentation down.
unless maybe Manny needs it.
No, I have it in front of me, but thank you, Mayor. Thank you. Interesting presentation. So I appreciate that. Obviously, some of the stuff that the mayor, I concurred with her, some of, you know, the 5 corners, pretty much that is on the way. You know, a lot of the stuff is, there's not really to inform, so which is just to let the people know that that is happening. So that's, you know, I think I want to have, I know you have one of the stuff more or less time back into the last, one of the last slides, but I wanted to kind of talk about the community center a little bit, because you are going to have the sessions as you presented to us. And just as a general comment, I guess, who's going to be on from staff, from Village, who's going to be in this presentation for the community center at some point?
Are you talking about for the webinar series?
Yeah.
So, you know, we can discuss different ways to do it. So we can have, I would definitely think it would be important to have the recreation superintendent at that presentation. I think in terms of how it's presented, that's really up to the board and the staff, because the presenting the information or facilitating the engagement of the meeting will be driven by what the outcome. So for that one, it would be partly informational, but for that one, you do want to have, and we will make sure that we gear these so that they're focused on good outcomes. So we can have recreational staff there to actually answer more specific questions as far as giving the presentation. I think it's perfectly appropriate for if the board would like to direct these presentations and give those presentations to set them up, that's appropriate. If we want other staff members to do it. But as far as making sure for each presentation, we have people who can speak specifically to it from a technical perspective, then the specific the specific staff people associated with those projects should be
Okay.
there as well.
That'd be helpful, again, because each presentation has a unique perspective and outcome, as was mentioned. So, and we do have documents, so more or less to have a contiguous presentation to the community in large. Which is the parking lot. I'm not going to talk about that. Market Square. That's going to be interesting. The downtown. I would love to see what the people think about the design. So I'm not going to talk about that either. Spring. I am want to talk about that. So we do have when we did 30 Water Street project, we had the developer, we had different engagements in the sequence of different meetings, just separate meetings that was just specific for that project itself. And one of them is obviously the same developer that had one in there. And my recollection, if I'm correct, that was one of the things that we did ask when they came in and presented to us, that was the engagement that we were looking for. But this is not it, correct? This is totally separate from what I'm assuming he's going to be doing as well.
I think so. I think it's a little bit different. So we know some of the issues aren't necessary, and we knew there were very specific issues with that site that we addressed through that. For the webinar series, to be able to do this, we thought this would be a good way to stage the webinars. But we definitely, we've talked to the developer today about more focused engagement. So for example, making sure that we're talking to the business community specifically, as a key stakeholder, so that we get input from them about their concerns about during the development and post-development, and making sure that everybody's on, has an understanding and is engaged in the transformation that's going to happen on the street. I think that with that, there may be more on-site things. We may decide to do separate webinars specific to that. But right now we're sort of laying it all out more broadly, but the developer has pretty much said they'll be wherever and whenever we want them. So I don't think that's going to be an issue. I think we'll have a better idea as we start this as how we might want to stage that specifically in terms of topics and
No,
orientation.
and I understand that. And I think this is more like an introduction to whatever
Yeah.
it may happen in the future, obviously. So that's what I would like to sort of, the first meeting in June 22nd to sort of be the introduction, and that could develop to half the second part of that,
Right.
which it could be a little bit more of information from getting the
Right.
feedback from the other part. I just, and I'm not sure, but I just want to have a point of clarification. This site is not in a historic downtown.
Right, but
Okay.
it's not, I do understand that, but the idea is that it will
Correct.
replicate that based on the form-based
It doesn't
code.
have to.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to duplicate, it has to complement.
Right.
It has to complement that site. So I just want to make sure that people understand that we're not going to just build something that is not complement, even though it's not an historic district.
Right.
It's adjacent to the historic district, but it's not, and does have an overlay, I think. No, it
Pardon me?
does not, it does not have an overlay, no. It's
For
not
that?
No, I don't think we have that overlay. With the overlay was just on the historic district.
I think it included those parcels too.
In the historic overlay, or are you talking about the downtown overlay?
Downtown overlay.
I believe the downtown overlay is
It's just on the downtown. It's not in this site
for Market Square.
for Market Square and the parking lot in there.
I believe it is. I mean, I
I
can take
think
a
it
look.
is, Manny.
Is it?
Yeah, because
So
I
you're gonna
think,
look
I
at
think
that
there
to make
was,
sure?
I think the idea, the overlay was to make sure that was ever
that-
developed there was done in keeping with,
I could be, again, I'm not, my recollection. You
can
guys can
look this
double
up,
check,
right?
but I don't, yeah, we don't have to do this.
but I
right
think
now.
that the bigger issue, the point
Yeah.
that you're trying to make is that we're not going to do something that's completely disassociated with the rest of the neighbor,
And I
that look and
think,
feel is
yeah,
important.
Obviously, having the developer part of those conversations, I think will be obviously helpful for that. as
So
well.
I'm hearing this just a little bit. I don't mean to stop your flow, but I just want to make sure I'm hearing this right. It feels like what Manny is asking for, or saying, is, which I didn't think about, but it's an important point. The village is not doing the public engagement on behalf of the developer. The developer still has a responsibility to do a deep dive into community engagement. This doesn't count as their community engagement. It's part of it, but you can't come back and say, we did community engagement. They've got to speak to the neighbors. They've
Yeah.
got to do their due diligence. They should be talking inside that neighborhood. You know, if it becomes a building and that's what we're doing, that's X number of units, people have to ask like, you know, what's it going to look like? Where's the cars going to go? Because that's really not what this should be. This shouldn't be, where do the cars go and how, you know, like, I mean, can be if that's what people ask, but there should be a commentary that this is not in place of the developer's responsibility. So I just.
Yeah,
wanna
no,
make
I
sure
think that's
what
absolutely
you're
true.
saying,
And I think
basically.
that was pretty clear. Trustee White and Trustee Lopez were on a call with the developer today, and I think that we made that clear that this would be part of a larger process.
This is our engagement. They have to do their.
Right.
So yeah, thank you, Valerie. It does
was the
cover the
answer? I
whole,
just saw her.
it does cover the whole downtown district. So it goes pretty much to Broad Avenue and parts of Broad Avenue.
Oh, so it goes all the way
So,
to,
yeah.
okay.
So I'm looking at the map myself, so thank you. Okay. I lost thanks. I lost it.
Yeah, I didn't want to scratch
that's
the
okay.
flow, but
No,
I
that's
just wanted
okay.
to make that
So
point you were making.
yeah, no. So now some of the stuff on the return on investment that you're referring to, you know, we do have you know, just for me, a little bit more of understanding. I get the payment in lieu of taxes. Agreements created as a win-win. So I think I need a little more clarification on that and what does that mean and who are we trying to engage at that?
So that's, you know, I think that when we had Balter present, there was discussion of a pilot request. So as we get to that point, we may not, you know, similarly, when we discussed the pilot, when we were talking about 30 Water Street, we talked about implications. So I don't know if we'll be at that point because that was different. Like he had the unit mix and everything already prescribed. But I think that it would be a way to start that conversation to put, you know, to make sure the developer understands that this would be done with an analysis that we do on our part, similar to what we just did with the Croton Avenue project, and that it's a consideration going forward that that would probably be an area where we would certainly have more follow-up discussion. So it may be general at that point, but I think it's just
Yeah,
putting
it-
everything that's going to be involved in context.
Yeah, so that this whole thing is very specific. So the last 3 meetings, I want to say is specific for that site.
The last
No.
three.
The
on
the last,
PowerPoint?
All those
so
topics are covered in that one.
yeah, but if we're talking about agreements, so agreements, who are we referring to agreements, creating a win-win? What is that? What does that
That
mean?
the pilot agreement would be specific to that site.
Okay, so that's what I'm
but
saying.
the
payment
other
in lieu
issues
and
are not.
taxes. So what is the budget impact and tax implications? What is
So,
that?
so
What
that,
is
that would be, so take into consideration for a lot of these projects, we're investing too. So for, when we presented, we're probably gonna, you know, based on what we proposed and the proposed budgets that were done for the DRI, we, you know, this isn't all being done with just DRI money. There's money. So there's a few $1 million for the community center that we're putting in. There's a substantial amount of money that the village is going to have to put in. We're going to be doing, that's another thing for the board and for the community, a whole analysis based on the anticipated cost of the parking garage, the revenue from fee parking. So that budget implication would really be more about, it wouldn't be probably at that point, I don't think we'd have enough information on what the pilot would be to do that. But this would be on the, you know, the impact to the general fund, the impact of bonding, what that would look like to make sure that, because what we're doing all through this is Dale is, you know, our finance department is very much aware of what we're doing. So we're being very cognizant that there's a price to every grant and that we are anticipating that in terms of looking forward, being forward thinking about what this would mean from us to bond for that money, as well as what it would mean for the general fund. So that would be more specific to the outlay of costs overall, the total cost of the projects.
And the impact on assessment, right?
Yeah.
Right, yes, yes,
So
absolutely.
this is my 2 cents on that one, because if I'm getting a little bit unclear of that, so my suggestion will be the pilot conversation maybe would bundle in one of the two conversations on one of the two meetings that we have, and maybe on the second part.
What slide number do you have?
Slide number, well, the
So
slide
more
number two. Because
little
it's
bit
very
more directly
specific,
to
part
that
two,
project.
part
Okay,
two
that's-
of that.
part-
I
part
believe
two.
that, to me, that because it's just for that particular
That makes
project,
sense.
will be specific for that. I think the other
That's a good
ones,
point.
the other ones could be, we can clear it out in a way, because we do have $21 million in grant. So I think one of the things that we talked about a couple of weeks back is like, we have the $10 million, and these are the projects that we get in the money, and how to, what is the balance of that money for the projects that we actually as making designation of all that money investment. So maybe clear that up a little bit better. I don't know how you guys could do it.
They
I'm sure
might be
this is,
doing that at the Zoom itself,
yeah,
like this
it
is
could
the
be,
headline, but
it could be.
I think
Yeah.
I was gonna bring that up when I said, oh, I'll come back. So I can come back to mine, so I'm not
That's
messing up
fine,
your
yeah.
flow.
No,
but
that's fine. You can do that, because I think
I was gonna talk about that, exactly to your point. I'll wait
So-
though till you guys are all done and bring it back, so I'm not.
so obviously, and I like the connection, the let's connect and portion. Hopefully I'll be able to see the map, because I think that was one of the things that I've been asking for.
I think you're
not
going to
gonna-
see the map by the end of this. We're trying to get it ready so that you can review it, because we're going to launch it next week.
Why are we looking at Valerie for that? No, I'm just kidding.
All over this thing.
It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work.
No, but and obviously, no, thank you. I know it becomes a lot of work and a lot of complex, the
week.
way you guys are doing all
Next
that
week.
stuff. So yeah. Is
This
this week,
week?
this Friday?
Right, we're
already-
hoping.
We
to
were
get it to
hoping
you.
Friday. I like that.
Well, we were-
Photos today, so we're gonna share.
We are, and I have to give them comments by tomorrow, so, but the idea is to have the materials for Thursday's presentations to you on Friday, so if you have any comments on the map, on the presentation for Thursday, you have enough time to look at it.
Okay.
Just as an aside for the map.
Microphone.
Sorry, just as an aside for
Sorry.
the map, just keep in mind that it is something that we can go in and tweak. So it's not, set in stone so it is meant to be a live document and we can update or change.
So we'll be able to update the content and pictures as we get, as we start proceeding on the projects, and we can update, things in progress. So it'll be very nice. So it'll be
No.
well worth the wait.
Hope everybody's bringing a cupcake for trustee Casada with 10 candles for every year to celebrate the request. You deserve a cupcake with many candles. We're all gonna
Or many
sing-
I'll
cupcakes.
take,
Or
I'll
many
take
cupcake.
a,
Well, I was saving money.
take a
for
cup
the
of coffee for
taxpayer.
this day.
We'll all sing happy birthday.
Thank
It's
you.
coming.
Okay. I like the last one, the catch outside portion, because I think it's always helpful to meet in the community. I
Yeah,
think we
it's
all
nice.
have done that in Market Square at some point of time. And
Nice.
even the working towards, I think this is always helpful to visualize more or less in what that could look like. So,
Yep.
sign me up at some point, let me know what days, Saturdays you guys are thinking, and I'll make sure. I still-
It would be very helpful to have people who speak Spanish at some of these events, and
I don't think, you're gonna have a hard problem finding those people in here on the board. I don't think.
Yeah.
But
but that's something
definitely,
we did,
It was actually in the email a little bit earlier, say for me. It's not just that. We don't have to have 12 people at every webinar. Everybody's showing up. We need to figure out a week or two in advance, 1 or 2 trustees, a language piece, who we call volunteers, is there a consultant? Because 12 people showing up from staff and board and all of that, and the next week, 3 people or 1, we need to divvy up the workloads so and see who's around, and I think it'll work beautifully. Some of it might be a consultant or 2, depending on the topic. I think this is really, the fact that we're having it now for the next few weeks.
Yeah,
should be
no.
Super helpful so
yeah,
that we're
no, I
not.
agree. I mean,
you know,
I'm definitely
very
not gonna be
nicely
on,
planned.
yeah, I'm definitely not gonna be on all the Thursdays, but-
That's sort of understood and we
Yeah.
understand that. I don't, we designed it so that it can be sort of flexible, that we don't, it doesn't have to be all hands on deck every meeting.
And I'm gonna watch them anyway, so it doesn't matter if I don't, but I think one of the things that I'm sure my colleague, Deputy Mayor Lopez is gonna say, are we gonna translate this? Is this gonna be in Spanish at some point of time? And how does that gonna
So,
work?
that I'm just remembering now too, we did do an audio in, when we did the 30 Water Street, we did it in Spanish and English. Didn't we do audio in Spanish? Didn't Jaime do Spanish? No?
I think what we did, I don't recall anything about audio, but I think what we did was when we sort of transcribed the audio into the FAQs, they were in the body of a web page that you could drop down and translate that into whatever language. I know it's not a perfect translation, but I think that's what we had done that time. I think the flyers Jamie did in Spanish. Jamie, am I remembering correctly?
Yes, but we also did one webinar in Spanish.
We did one webinar. I knew we did something in Spanish.
We did, yes.
So,
And everything
that,
was translatable.
so, I had spoken to, Trustee Lopez about the project presentation, that we did a couple of weeks ago, 2 weeks ago. Having, Trustee Lopez volunteered to sort of do a Spanish, video of that, and that you could do, we may want to do that with the overview story map presentation too, which again, because it's going to be on the website, you can translate it into almost any language.
No, that would be helpful. I think we have staff to be able to translate. and,
Yeah, absolutely.
None of us is available, but I'm sure we'd be able to find someone to be able to translate.
Not just on the board.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, we have staff that can help with translate.
We're also, I think, gonna hopefully benefit from native Spanish speakers on the place-taking committee too, based on some of the interest we have, and there's interest from the some of the Ecuadorian and Guatemalan-owned businesses in the area. So
Okay. I don't have any questions right now, any additional questions right now. And I think if anything, I'll ask later, or if not, I'll send an email, but this is good. Thank you.
thank you.
Sir?
Ma'am. I want to start with Spanish. So I love the ideas flowing to me. Language access, as you know, is a big deal. Some ideas. We could have one session that is specifically in Spanish like we did last time. The benefit of that is that it's one specific time that everybody that is Spanish speaking can go and get information on all the projects. The trade-off is it's one session as opposed to all of them, but more than that, when we had it last time was that there was a relatively low attendance rate. And so if we were to do it, then we would also have to think about how to activate and engage the Spanish speaking community. So that's one idea. Another idea, we could, after each of these is posted to YouTube, what I can do is I can grab the presentation from you all and then record a Spanish language version of just the presentation part. That will create a version of each one of these that doesn't have the Q&A portion translated, but at the very least, you can get the information about the presentation. It's usually like 10 minutes or something like that. So that's another thing that we can do. And the third, which Manny suggested as well, was having ensuring that there's at least one Spanish speaking person on each of the calls. I think that's good.
Okay.
So, take all that and do with it what you will.
And sorry, Omar, and before you continue,
Please.
I think, one of the biggest, and he's right, sometimes we struggle with getting people engaged to these meetings, but I think one of the advantages that we have seen, at least in the Spanish community, is when we go to Market Square. And that's when we get more engagement in that. So maybe instead of doing all that stuff, we can set a flyer and be like, we're going to be here every Saturday for the next 5 weeks or whatever the case may be. And that's when we're going to be talking about a lot of the stuff. And something that I forgot to mention is, and to the mayor's point, we have done a lot of engagement in the past, from the parking study that we
Oh,
did.
yeah.
from even Market Square that we have done for all
Barca.
this, all these things that, we're not in a blind areas. We have responded to all those because of all the studies, because of all that stuff. So it's not, we want to make sure that they understand that as well. So, sorry.
A
Omar.
couple other options. I mean, you might have done this before, but there are translations available on Zoom. So there is a toggle that you can have. And so then somebody can select whatever language they would like the speaker. Yes. So if somebody does come that speaks a different language, they can hear the whole entire presentation.
Well, I haven't been doing
Yes.
that till now. That
So, I
sounds
mean,
like
I
a
can-
really
I
good
didn't
idea.
know about this, Valerie. You
Yeah,
just.
so,
you
right,
start
I
right-
work in a couple of different communities. We've had to deal with different accessibility and translation. So that's an option. Another thing that
We should
sometimes,
try that out.
yeah, and I
That'd be
can work with, I can show Jamie and.
All of these are on Zoom, right? So that would
Yeah.
actually be
Yes.
super.
So then that would mean that we wouldn't necessarily have to do a dedicated Spanish version and then
Well,
converse.
so I think, right, so it would be for the individual viewer as opposed to the entire thing. So I would, right, so the individual, but you could advertise it that, you would have that ability.
Yeah.
And another
Like on
option.
Facebook, right? You could actually do it. to the
Right, and you could see the
language.
translation while you're.
And is it limited to certain languages, or if you're Chinese and need Chinese or Arabic, does it do
So
all?
it does do a number of different languages,
Oh.
yes.
Even better.
So, what I think that makes sense because, look, generally speaking, even in the English speaking ones, we had one that had like a few people attend and then the attendance dwindled down. And I think what we know that happens when we're recording stuff, people will be like, well, I can catch it on, the YouTube channel, or I can catch it later. And that's great because that's the beauty of this, because you can keep referring people to it and we get
Right.
we have a documented and it lives and it's very transparent. So it seems like either having the ability on the user end to translate or translating subsequent, after the fact, we probably covered that base. But I think being creative about definitely giving Neighbors Link and Open Door a call about reaching
Yeah.
out to how we engage people. One of the things that Open Door is very much interested, because they're going to be starting their project soon, which is, a sizable project on Main Street in this area, that they really want it to be well integrated. They're aware of what we're doing. We want to make sure that the way, not only just in look and feel or making sure that we're complementing architecturally, but also the fact that you are talking about one of our largest employers. So their employees are going to be able to patronize shops and everything. And that also they're part of economic development too. And then again, their patient base, which is a large number of native Spanish speakers, is a way to reach people too. And this is about whether it's they're partnering with us on Project Mover or other things we're doing, that's another avenue. So I think if we can reach out to those groups as well to make sure that we're covering. And the farmers market, you really do get a wide cross section of a lot of different people. We definitely found that it was a great place to do outreach. So that's another thing where we'll make sure we have somebody who speaks Spanish. That's what we typically did or we've done for all our other events. So.
All good. So next, I want to talk about physical promotion. So I know that there's a lot of value, and I'm a big fan of the digital promotion, but there are swaths of people that don't engage with those particular channels. So some ideas that I wanted to throw out there. One is we're sitting at the tables on Saturdays. I don't know if we have something that we're handing out to people or that they can take with them, but even if what we had was postcards or slips of paper or something like that, that have a QR code or that have some information that bring them to a page that we can update, or that, the story map or that kind of thing, but that shows, hey, we want you to engage, take this, it has information on when all the sessions are happening, what's going on, that kind of thing. posters or particularly ones that we can distribute to local businesses, especially those around Main Street, that they can put up. I know that the delis and the barber shops and lots of businesses have spaces where they can put things up. Here Coffee has a community board, things like that. And I don't know if we're leveraging the banners at all, the one at the top of Main Street, the one, we have these particular banners. I don't know, we want to have them up all the time for these particular ones, but for engagement, I don't know, wanted to throw that out there as well.
We also are going to have our big bellies finally.
The double Bs.
And
yeah.
the big bellies are coming. They're big, so it takes them, they move very, very slowly, evidently. But they're going to be here, we'll be doing it. And Jamie's working on that. But, it was, I'm glad that you brought that up because we had a youth advisory board advisory meeting last week. I really can't talk anymore. But we have a youth member now who, when we were talking about outreach, said, well, you got me with a flyer, so maybe you could do just more of the grassroots, old-fashioned grassroots type of stuff. So this was coming from somebody who's much younger and very, very much worn into the digital age. So I think there is a lot of value doing it, and we're happy. We did do some flyering during the DRI engagement, walk to all the businesses. It's a good way to meet people too. So.
Next, as you talked about some of the audiences, and just thinking about who are the people that haven't engaged as much, young people. And so I think the extent to which we can do exactly what you did, ask them what are ways that we might be able to engage with seniors, with people new to the community, with whatever these particular populations are, including for me, parts of the village that aren't engaged as much, whether it's Sparta or Upper Croton or, kind of whatever it is, where it's just like folks live there and that's what's going on there. And it's very residential. What might be ways of ensuring that it just so happens to be that they went through Main Street and that's how they found out about it. But, I don't know, but I'm thinking about those people that we don't typically engage. I love how much personality is in this. I want to encourage that. I see Maddie's fingerprints all over this kind of thing. I think that is great. These projects are large and impactful and important and complex, and one can get lost in, is this happening in the T-zone and how's it going to affect, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, so the more you can zhuzh it up, I think that's great. I'm a big fan. You've done it here. I say, let's continue in that way. Yes. And the last piece for me is contextualization. So I see these as being serialized. They're kind of like watching an episode of Friends. You can watch one and it's a self-contained thing, or watch a season and there's an arc through the whole thing. Same thing here. Whether you're just engaging with one of these or all of them, I think it's helpful to contextualize this work in some of the larger things. And this is what Mandy was alluding to. Going back to the comprehensive plan and how this touches on that, and where all these different projects are coming from, and the fact that they're not arbitrary, that they're responding to real needs. We often, because it's kind of just us in the room and then the people that happen to watch as well, don't often feel the need to go into that level of foundational description. That's one of the things that did happen in the 30 Water Street series that I would want to continue, that contextualization in each one, so that folks know what is going on, even if it's the first time they're engaging with it. That's it. Thank you.
Great. Dana, you got anything?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a whole lot to add on the logistics of how we're going to do this. I think it's great. I think that, hopefully people could come to this with a spirit of collaboration and excitement, because, we're as close as we've ever been and probably ever will be again to restoring the other half of our street. This is not really, it's funny, we're building, and we're replacing in a way. And you can't right the wrongs of the past, but of course you can, what you do that's new and how you reinvent what's there, you create a new present. And, you know, I would obviously like to see this echo what was there, but but not necessarily mimic it. I think that what's really important is showing what was there, and I would love to see us, and I can help with this, integrate lots of photos of what was there. Because I think it's inspiring, you know? And I think that maybe to give people a sense of the size of what's gonna be there and how that's gonna look within the context of everything else is, I mean, super important to me. But I think that, you know, I think this is really an exciting time. We're thinking big, we're doing big things, and we can do these big things together. And this is something that the community can come together and make what we do the best it can be for everybody. So that's what I'm looking forward to.
Great. It's a fine line. It's like, I always found it interesting to think that we have half of downtown and the other half. But what I found interesting, because I'm such more of a pragmatic person, is it's new, but it's totally doable because it used to be there. You know, it's that to me, it's like, I actually never like to move backward personally, you know, and Dana and I are different in this sense, but we get inspired coming at it differently. But at the end, it's the same thing, which is when people say, what are you, crazy? Blah, 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 blah. I go, well, no, because look at it. It used to be like that. You're just actually re-engineering, and it's totally doable because in fact, that's how it was originally done. You know, in fact, when we took that walk, Karen, somebody was saying to me, I was here when I was a kid and there used to be a movie theater and a bowling alley. And if you said we're going to put a bowling alley and a movie theater, everybody would go, you nuts, where are you going to put it? But the fact is, it used to be there. It's not nuts at all. So for a person who's very pragmatic as I am, it's just so logical that it's like easy, you know, it's like you're thinking big, but it's doable. So it puts things into sort of space for me. So I think it hits to sort of the minds and hearts of many different types of people. And I think that's what we sort of always have to keep in mind. As many of us have stated who sat in these chairs, we cannot listen to the squeaky wheels and react to the individual squeaks. We have to remember that this is a large community. And when we talk about investments in the community, and people use the word community, as I've learned, in so many different ways, but for me, it's like the zip code, you know, it's the whole thing. And it's all different people. The businesses have to be engaged. You got the businesses together a couple of years ago, maybe it's longer than that, to talk about the event schedules and all that. So you got like, I don't know, 50 or 60 people in a room at some point with that. They've got to be engaged, and because it really affects the businesses in a material way. So I see like there are different groups and cross sections that we can get, as Dana said, actually excited about this, not sit there and talk about why it's difficult and why it's expensive. But I will say, to Manny's point, which I think is really, really important, people don't know which are the DRI projects and which are projects that are not DRI. That has to be delineated. Not that we forgot ones or don't want to discuss ones. This is a DRI discussion. It's state driven. We have to understand that. We didn't get a big fat check, and it costs more than 10 million bucks to do all these projects. And people don't have a sense of what $10 million is. It sounds like so much money. In the world of infrastructure, it's nothing. So I think that has to be made clear right up front. I think Manny was sort of talking about that. Also, I wouldn't put a list of what's not a DRI project, but there are projects that are overlapping. The community center, the money is flowing in from different pieces. They're not all DRI. And if we never do anything from the DRI money, we're still going to be able to do something, some other monies that we have. But I think it has to be delineated so that not everything is up for grabs based on some people's opinion. And you can't do things like, well, 100% of people that came to that meeting or were on Zoom said this, therefore, because if 100% is 6 people, while it's important to listen to 6 because they showed up, it doesn't really create a number that's going to drive everything. So I think we have to be really careful with data and how we do things. as to how to reach people, always a challenge. I think this is great because people could be told weeks in advance that these are the days we're doing stuff. You are going to get people that say, seriously, you chose the same day of the week? Like if I can't make one Thursday, I can't make any of the Thursdays. I'm like totally out of all of them. I'm sure you've thought about that. There's no great day, as we were interviewing somebody for the Youth Advisory Board before this meeting earlier today. And she was like, I'm so busy. I don't know. And I said, well, of course you're busy because we only ask busy people to join committees and stuff because those are the best people, are the ones that are already on a million things, you know, and she's got school and all that. But it reminded me that we've chosen one night, same time, which means those that can't make Thursdays are totally not going to be visible at this. But all the other stuff is available. So if we list all the other stuff we're doing, I think that's going to be the winner. I think we also have to like go fishing with a fish jar. So we should also think of the group of all of our boards, like all 50, I think you used to say 13, but it's actually 15 now. There should be a way that we could do a short presentation to all of the boards and councils because they themselves are 130 something people. I don't know how to do that because their meetings are already so packed. But it's something to think about because those are very involved people in our community also. So it's the business group, it's some of the nonprofits that are built. I mean, even an Open Door, if you could find a time where you could speak to their board and or to in a staff meeting where you could share their staff. What did she say? They have 400 or 500 volunteers all over, but that's probably about 100 here in Ossining, I bet you. That's like a lot of people. If 25% showed up, it's a nice number, 25. So just food for thought about how to get people excited and get input.
We, we have had a lot of success on past things. And I remember from my former role working at FCA that elected officials and people would come down and speak at tenant meetings and board meetings about things that were going on. So particularly with the organizations that serve a dedicated Ossining constituents, or clients or whatever, based on the nature of their organization. I have no problem making the extra time to do this because I think it's really important. And once you start talking about it, you know what you're going to say and, you're set. So it's certainly worth the extra time. I think that we can do more of that. Not, again, we'll make the time to do it. So it's
just something to think about. 'Cause
Yeah.
It's a puzzle with lots of pieces. And some you might want to say, let's take 5 of these projects together. Let's condense. And some it's a specific project because it involves whatever.
Well, like for example, the Recreation Advisory Board is like, they want to, do things at the rec center, involved in helping to bring people together. And I think that's an extremely great use of their time,
Yeah.
given everything else they're doing. So I think there's other groups that are doing things too. And because, so I think there's a lot of different opportunities and we're willing to spread out and be creative and, let the board know, let our other volunteer board member, that are on different committees know. And I think with the placemaking committee too, as soon as we get that together, that's really going to be a great conduit to engage more people about these things because most of these projects really touch on placemaking in a pretty dynamic way.
Once you get all of this, like the map that can be changed and all that, I would just suggest very inexpensively getting us the size of business cards with a QR code.
Yep.
So that when we're speaking, they could take a picture and they can look at the presentation and tell them to hold on to the card because sure, you can give them, go to the website, but then they go, people don't. Sure. If you have a QR code just for the GRI and you produce a few of them, we could just have people take a picture of them and say, you can look this up. These are just ideas, not, to do all of them, but I think we're just sharing some and we could be part of that as well. But otherwise, I like super excited. I don't have enough caffeine today. It's been a long day, but I'm super excited with like seeing some of the stuff actually beginning to happen. So I think it's very cool. Anyway,
We're
I
excited.
think we got everybody's input. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Next on the agenda, you might remember that we had spoke about a local law to create payment in lieu of parking, or not a pilot, but a pile-up. It sounds like a pile-up, which is, I don't know, I'm getting used to that term. But this would be a way that we can address some of the parking issues we have with our limited parking spaces, but maybe for new development, use a fee instead of a waiver, so that we can invest in things like parking structures and things that would address the challenges that we have when people waive their parking requirements. So with that, I would like to turn it over to our corporation counsel, Stuart Kahan, and Assistant Village Manager, Maddie Zahaj.
I will in turn turn it over to my two
Yeah, I was gonna go. I thought it was.
far more
Maddie.
able
Okay.
people on the other side of the table, Maddie and Valerie. Thank you.
Thank you. I can do a little bit of setup and then I'll turn it over to Valerie. Thank you, Stuart. Good evening. So Karen is correct. I think we brought this originally to the board back in, I want to say it was March of 2022. This is one of the recommendations from the Nelson Nygaard Mobility and Parking Study. I know this was something that the village board had also considered some time ago, but it looks like the infrastructure, continued to snag us the way that it did last year in the past, but now we think we're coming at it from the right direction. So essentially right now, when we have buildings in our downtown that are looking to adaptive reuse or something of that nature, and they require a parking waiver. In all cases, basically the language in our code is the planning board shall, and it basically doesn't give them much discretion so long as, all four of the, I think, conditions are intact, and there's no limit on how many of those spaces may be waived. So right now, we are looking at proposing a sort of a new policy, which is going to be codified in a local law that has a fee schedule, which is going to be in the village's fee schedule, so that it doesn't require a new local law every time the board wishes to revisit it. But basically, under certain circumstances, it would require, or it wouldn't require, it would allow developers of property to be able to make payment into the PILOP, payment in lieu of parking fund, instead of providing some or all of the parking that they require on site. So we were just talking about this earlier today. It's really important, and I think Valerie and Stuart have come up with a really great balance. We want to incentivize people to put parking on site to the degree that it's practical, but we also don't want there to be massive swaths of pavement in our downtown that's not being used regularly 24 hours a day. We've gone to the trouble to go through everything that the manager just laid out to sort of consolidate our surface parking into one place so that all of the other uses can be more effectively used by residents and visitors. So sort of finding that balance between amounts that are going to make both of those things a reality is something that I think we're going to sort of have to play with over time, but I think we're off to a really good start. And on that note, I will turn it back over to Valerie.
Great. So I just wanted to, so I'm just building off of what Maddie just presented. We wanted to just kind of talk about a little bit of the changes that we're proposing for the code itself. First of all, right now, as Maddie mentioned, that the current waiver falls within the VC, SPN, and NC2 zoning districts. And it does specifically say that the planning board shall issue those waivers if 4 conditions are met. What we are proposing that we would tweak this. And so basically what we would now do, we would require parking on site to be provided for whenever there's an increase in actual building expansion or development of new units or the creation of additional bedrooms. So really it's focused on new development, not necessarily, replacement of like one use or another use into existing buildings. It's also would be required specifically dealing with if you were to build just regular building expansions. And we would still be offering, and we're still proposing to offer a parking waiver up to 10 spaces if you're changing from one non-residential use to another non-residential use in an existing building where you're not necessarily, again, expanding or having the development of new units or bedrooms. What we are proposing also is that it's not necessarily, you wouldn't necessarily have to provide parking for the entire building. It would really only be for that expansion or those additional units. So if you already have units in a building, or if you already have non-residential uses in the building, you're looking to expand, add an addition onto the building, it would really be the new parking would be for that addition. So ultimately, the property owner would have the option of either trying to work in providing the parking on site, or they could pay in lieu of parking.
What are they paying in lieu of parking?
So right now, we proposed, or we have a suggested scale based upon the Nelson Nygaard study, as well as it's comparable to some other Dobbs Ferry, which is 1 to 5 spaces, $5,000 for each space, 6 to 10 spaces, $10,000 for each space, 11 to 15 spaces, $15,000 for each space, 16 to 20, $20,000 for each space, and then 21 plus is 25,000 for each space. So there's a progressive increase as the more spaces you need are not able to provide on site. Now, I mean, that scale, I mean, that's just the beginning. We can always adjust it, but this
a
is,
one-time fee?
so this would be, yes, this would be a one-time fee. And then ultimately, so let's just say somebody were to develop 5 units, and they needed the spaces and they paid their payment in lieu of parking. Then if a new property owner comes in and they still want to continue those units, they wouldn't have to repay for the payment for those parking spaces. However, if they decided to add new units into the building or expand the building, then they would have to either provide for that expansion or the additional units or pay in at that point.
Thank you. This makes a lot of sense to me. I guess the question that I have is around incentives. I'm not quite sure what behavior we are attempting to incentivize using this particular model. So right now, the idea is that they get the waiver and that's it. We get nothing. So here we get something. So that's good, right? Something's better than nothing from our perspective. I'm not quite clear from the person that would be paying the fee. Are we trying to disincentivize them because we have a limited amount of real estate? That's part of the problem that we're trying to solve for here. And so this is like, well, we can take some of this money and put it in a larger pot, and then that'll go toward a larger solution that will be more systematic, that will comprehensive, if you will. But given the numbers, a 5,000 here, a 10,000 there, we're talking about how much these infrastructure costs are for if you were to actually develop a garage, how much would that really, a one-time $5,000 fee per spot? It's like, it's not paying for a lot. So it's not functionally paying for actually solving the problem of parking, but it's creating some resistance, or just like, I don't know. So that's the idea. That's what I'm looking for some clarity on.
Right. So I think the concept is, right, so they're clearly not going to be paying for the cost of like that one spot, especially if you're dealing with structured parking. But what it is supposed to hopefully incentivize the developer to potentially look at their site plan to see if they can include a few spots or some spots, right? Instead of paying those additional fees. And then if for some reason they're not able to, that the village would actually be able to benefit from those additional fees to put into like the parking structure that's proposed to be developed in the downtown. Because ultimately those residents or, customers would be utilizing those spaces.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Valerie. I think I'm still struggling in regards to the fees.
Sure.
I think those fees from Dobbs Ferry, and I was trying to see, I was like looking on their website now, see if I can find them, if they made any changes, but I don't think that amount has changed in the past 10 years, maybe less.
I think
I think it should be higher. Yeah.
That's what I was trying to get.
Yeah,
So
I
we
think it
can
should be
discuss
higher.
dollars
so
and
that's-
cents.
I mean,
But you think they're too low?
I think they're too low. I
Okay.
think the concept of what you have in here, and that was one of the questions that I had, is because right now, if I have a retail space, sure, and it goes from a retail space to, for argument's sake, a restaurant,
Right.
changes, and they still have to go in front of the planning board to get a waiver because now you're changing the occupancy load.
Right.
So what does that look like? But you answered that question
Right.
within in here. So I think that's something that is helpful. And not only that, but we do have a local law that we changed a few years back. When any business come in, they have to provide, even if it's the same use, they have to provide some sort of layout. So we need to kind of track of that as well. So, yeah, I'm okay, looking at the language. I don't have any changes.
When was the Dobbs Ferry law? Anybody who looked it up? I don't know who looked it
So
up. When was it?
the
put in?
original Dobbs Ferry, I mean, that was in 2010.
Mhm.
And I believe they increased the fees a little bit recently, but it's been a while.
Okay, so let's assume that you want to put in a 2 to 3% increase a year or something, and you'll come up with a more reasonable, which they should have done. But they may have solved their problem, given, I mean, if you go to Dobbs Ferry, there's different issues there.
And we talked about this a little earlier too. I think, putting it in the fee schedule, a lot of the municipalities that Stuart and his staff looked at earlier actually had the fee schedule written within their code, which means, similar to what we did with the parklets, right? If you ever want to open it up, that means you have to go through the whole public hearing process and what have you. We're recommending that this be part of the annually adopted fee schedule so we can figure out a way to index it. So if, for example, the board settles on, the tier that Valerie is recommending or something different, we could say, okay, well, what was our tax cap increase last year? 2%? All right, 2%. Something that actually
As
is.
an index, it could
Yeah.
be a CPI, whatever you announce to the public. If it's the Westchester CPI, it's the New York State CPI, it's the US CPI, whatever, but something, which in my lifetime, I've seen it go down literally twice in all these years. And when it went down, I meant it just didn't go up. It didn't even go down. It never goes down in New York, and it's just a matter of how much it goes up, but it keeps things indexed and it allows you to do that. Dana, I have a couple of comments. Dana, questions, comments? Maybe she's not on. Oh, there she is. You're on mute.
No, I think if I can get an example where somebody would need to do a pile up. I mean, can I get an example of, you know what I mean? Because it feels very abstract to me. I mean, if
Sure.
they're putting up a building and there's no parking or could you give me an example?
So for example, well, I can use a current example that's in front of the planning board right now, 14 Church Street. 14 Church Street is they have a building, they already have residential and they have some units and they're looking to build additional units onto a third story. Their site cannot accommodate any parking, so therefore they would be required as part of this, the new law, the new
Where's 14
regulations.
Right next to Open Door, that.
Oh, that's right. I got it. Okay.
So as part of that, they would have to pay in lieu of parking for those additional residential dwelling units.
Okay.
But here's the thing, there's still not going to be any place for these new people living there in these new apartments to park. You know what I mean? Like, okay, they pay that money, but this people with the cars are still going to be looking for places to park. That hasn't been provided to them, and I don't know, what am I missing? I'm sorry.
Right, so go ahead.
No, I think this is something that is worth expanding on because it is counterintuitive. But under our current system, you can get a waiver, which basically just, you shall get a waiver. You actually are probably going to get a waiver,
Not probably,
even
you
though the
will.
reality is we have a finite space for parking and so it does raise a question because it seems counterintuitive to people that you would allow somebody to build something without parking. So to talk about that specifically about the current way it's done versus and what we're proposing and why what we're proposing at least gets us to the point where there could be other parking.
Right, I mean, I think part of this, I mean, when the waiver was put into place, which was back in 2009, there was a lot of vacancies. And one of the issues at that point, everything needed parking. And so the concern from the village at that point in time was that, they wanted to incentivize redevelopment of the vacant underutilized buildings. They wanted to incentivize redevelopment of some of the vacant lots, which, did take place. There was a lot of redevelopment that took place down there. And at this point in time, now you're
We're
getting
going the other way.
right. Well, now you're getting to the point of where you're starting to maximize the public parking that is available. And so at this point, it's probably time to take a step back and try to incentivize developers putting the actual parking on site as they look at the development of their particular projects, right? Because at this point, because a lot of developers know that they can get the waiver and that the waiver is, something that is basically mandated by the planning board to issue in those particular zoning districts.
So this would incentivize them because in order to not spend this money, they
Right.
can try and find the parking on their property.
Right.
Which in the case of 14 Church Street doesn't seem likely.
So-
Unless, because there's a parking lot next door, but it's not theirs. Right? I don't know if they have an agreement with Open Door or what.
Right. No, they don't have an agreement with Open Door.
But that's the other thing. It's sort of time for what they've done in more urban areas for people when they want to make more money on collecting rent. Part of their cost should be that they take into consideration how many people they're putting in and how many cars there are, and either pay into a system that requires more service, that where the burden is really on the shoulders of other people, more sanitation, more this, more that, that it's actually not fair to your neighbors who went through the trouble of either not, of managing their piece of real estate. There's also, for me, in a real example, I'm not sure that's the best example, but there's an example. I don't want to use names because I know they're going to be coming up in front of the planning board, but there's people that are adding another floor, and because it says shall, they know they're going to get the waiver, but that street that they think they're going to be using, that street doesn't expand because they're expanding their building and they have a driveway. They just closed it off. So there's a bigger area for their dog to run around in. And I keep saying people like that should go back to what that purpose was, which is a driveway where there's room for 2 to 3 to 4 more cars. They just decided they wanted more space for their barbecue and their dog. I mean, I'm speaking about, like, when these people hear this, they'll know exactly what I'm speaking about, but I'm not mentioning names here. We have a lot of houses. When you look to the back of the house, there is ability to park. People have closed off their driveways, but now they've decided they want to go into the landlording business, into renting out here and renting out there. Those people, for sure, either you contribute to your neighbors who you're making them bear the burden of your decision to expand your house into some rental thing, or you want to build up, but you don't have any parking, but other people will bear that burden as well. And you might want to think a little bit in how you design that and how many rooms. Instead of 3 apartments, maybe you'll build 2, it's whatever. Maybe you'll build 3, but you'll build it in a different way. I sort of like the bedroom idea. I like the idea I've heard this argument about the shall being the wrong word in that text. And I didn't know it was done in 2009. So I think that's interesting. There were a lot of communities that were sitting empty in Westchester. New Rochelle was a bowling alley.
Right.
White Plains was a bowling alley. I mean, you can go hiking there and not bump into anybody. And now, so they made laws to incentivize, but now it's tilting in the other direction. And so that's, I think, a good historic perspective. I don't know what the right number is. That's why I was asking you where you were going. And we always have this problem. Is it $1? Is it $1.50? Is it $2? Like, we sit here for an hour deciding on the exact right amount. It's hard, but a ballpark. You think the ballpark should be generally higher than it is. I don't think you had an opinion except what they're recommending. I don't have an opinion except what you're recommending, but Manny's suggesting that you're looking at 2010, you might want to create some sort of index and see if that might need to be bumped up a bit. I don't know the answer to that. So we're asking to be vote on the text change that includes both a change and then the dollar amounts. I know we can change the fees at any time.
You're not voting on anything now. Let's
I
be-
know it's a work session.
No.
but yeah.
I need to, the procedure's important here.
Okay.
All you would be doing is authorizing me to prepare a resolution for you to refer the text to the planning board so they can provide you with a recommendation, because this is a change to the zoning code.
Oh, I see. They're the
has to-
ones that are actually recommending. the
No,
wording.
no, they're not.
No. You are, a text change can be done by an outsider or by you as the board. you are recommending a text change based upon what Valerie has proposed here.
Right.
That text change must go to the planning board for their recommendation back to you. You then would conduct a public hearing as if it was a local law. It's going to have to go through secret. It's going to have to, all that's going to have to happen.
Okay. got
But
it.
it has to, so part of what I'm saying is you don't have to decide the fees right now,
Right.
because that's going to be in essence at the end of the show
Okay.
when you get there. Right now, the question is to get it before the planning board, potentially even for their next meeting, so that they can consider it, come back and give you their recommendation.
Got it. So this is a go, no go conceptually without the specifics.
Right. One other thing I just want to point out, this, as Valerie has put it together, also incentivizes the village because the escrow money is only held for 10 years. After 10 years, it goes back to the developer. So if you don't spend it, you lose it. So it's in your interest to use it for the different aspects that it has. Doesn't mean you have to use it to build a multimodal center. You can use it for other transportation type things, but you have it for 10 years. And that period of time you see throughout all the other localities that have this type of payment in lieu. That escrow money is held for a certain period of time, and then if it's not used, it gets turned back.
These are not just for developers, it's for everyone, right?
Well, within these three zoning
Within the three
districts.
zones, yeah. for the three
Understood.
zones. Sorry, Valerie, one quick question, what Dana was talking about before, because there, one of the reasons a lot of this, we've been seeing a lot of this in the past few years is because they go in front of a zoning board and they cannot get a variance for parking. And they looked at into the planning where you can get this waiver.
Right.
Is anything tying back into this where, because they now, if they don't want to pay, if someone doesn't want to pay, now they have sort of the option that they can go back into the zoning board and try to get a variance for the amount of parking. Exactly. So
So-
I want to make sure that I'm closing, because
You want to
now
close all the doors?
I want to close all the doors in a way that, because it's harder for them to get a parking variance. So they go to the planning board to get a waiver, which is pretty easy to get.
Right.
So, but now we are closing this door and we sort of leaving this other door sort of halfway.
Right, so they would still need, so the way the payment in lieu of is that no matter what, they would still, right, we're saying that this is what the requirement is, and correct me if, but a variance itself is really, you're varying, like you would be varying for the amount of parking that you actually have to put on site. Basically, they're getting almost like a baked in variance by saying, if you can only put in 10 spaces and you need to put 20 spaces in, then you can pay in lieu of those 10 spaces.
But I didn't
So-
see any language in here that is saying that though, or it's tying it back into the other section of the code.
Right, so it refers to at the beginning of the section when we talk about where the parking is required, where are the amount of parking that's required for those individual zoning districts and the circumstances, then when you get down to the section for payment in lieu of parking, and then that's when it says in lieu of providing all or part of off-street parking, the new development, change in use, expansion or enlargement of the premises that requires additional off-street parking, and development application may request to the satisfaction for the developer to contribute in the interest-free bearing account. So I can work with Stuart to try to make sure that it's very clear that it's, if you can't provide the parking and you're going to make this application. And I think, Stuart and I and Maddie also talked about this, because part of the thing with the payment in lieu of parking is not to create a situation where you theoretically deny, or that there's a high chance that those would be denied, because then that kind of is counterintuitive to the whole process. So it really is to have a monetary amount and to incentivize people to try to put some parking on site, and then also for the village to benefit, but then also not have it too high of an amount that it de-incentivizes any sort of redevelopment or economic investment into your community.
Also, the payment is not an automatic.
Right.
You still would have the authority to approve disapprove, or modify.
Right.
So at the end of the day, you'll have a fee schedule, but if you figure, no, we'd like you to to put in 5 more spaces, that's what it would be. The ultimate deciding authority on whether or not the application for a payment in lieu would come from this board, following a recommendation from the planning board. But
Right.
still, it's not an automatic.
You know, and that's the part, I think those ferry works the same way. And now when they go in front of the village boards to get that portion of it. So in other municipalities, I think the same way. Yeah, if you guys can work on that part
Yep.
of the language so we can close that loop portion of it, so that would be helpful too. So thank you.
So you're in support of this?
I am, yes.
Okay, I'm in support. You said you're in support? Dana, you said you're in support? Okay, we'll move forward. Next.
Okay, next on our agenda, also parking related. As you know, we've been doing a lot of work on parking and we're also going to a new parking vendor that's going to help us with some of our really, this is a piece that's working a little bit better with our court system than our previous vendor was working. So we've straightened out a lot, and thank you to Maddie Zahach and the police department and the clerk's office for straightening that out. But in straightening that out, we have realized that we have an issue with some of the fines that we have that, probably just because they haven't been looked at in some time, they're really not in alignment with what other municipalities have. And a lot of these things are fines for issues that are related to quality of life. And we certainly want to discourage things that impact quality of life negatively, especially since we don't have an empty Main Street anymore. And we do have more cars and more parking. So along that vein, this would be looking at our fines and looking to adopt a new fee schedule. So you had received some information on that to review. So with that, I will turn it over to Corporation Counsel and Assistant Village Manager, Maddie Zahaj, to discuss this.
Thank you. I'll begin and then I'll turn it over to Maddie, who has done much more of the legwork on this than I. Maddie and I had a lot of conversations with Dennis Farrell, who is in the head of FBS, which will be our new vendor for the parking tickets. He's already started, but the actual effective date will be May the 15th. Dennis has also had conversations with Judge Gasparo from the court end. And one of the things that we've been discussing are changes in the physical ticket, and that's something that is going into effect, but which will continue. But what is before you this evening is a proposed local law, which would take many of the vehicle and traffic violations for parking, and let's just call it stop, stand, and park to make it easy. And rather than go under the vehicle and traffic law, to make them all village code violations. Mr. Farrell has explained that in fact, in most municipalities in New York State, that is actually what is done. So if you have, for example, and I put some of these things in here, if you have parking in a crosswalk or parking at an intersection, which is a violation under the vehicle and traffic law, it would now become a violation under the village code. And in conjunction with that, you would adopt a fee schedule, which would be a new schedule. I think I made it 25 or whatever section is. There would be a new schedule of all these different fees. So what we're proposing is to amend the code to include certain definitions for things like crosswalk and intersection and fire vehicle and driveway so that it's all consistent. And then to include effectively 18 new violations going from parking in intersections, parking on elevated structures where you're not supposed to park, parking in front of public driveways, within 30 feet of a control signal, 20 feet of a fire station, all these different things, which already are on our tickets but they're vehicle and traffic violations. They would now become strictly village violations. I'll get into the significance of that in a moment. And that would then allow the village to set a fee schedule for these different violations, rather than depend upon the fee schedule, which is essentially set by the vehicle and traffic law by the State Department of Transportation. So we would have our own fee schedule. And one of the things that Mr. Farrell pointed out is that many of our fees are actually fairly low. So we would raise those fees up, and we would also then have it that the fee would double, treble, I think it's double, treble, and quadruple, in fact, if it's 30, 60, or 90 days. But the important thing with that is currently, if you get a ticket, the ticket says you have to appear in court on X date. This creates what Mr. Farrell called, and which is actually true, in essence, a phantom calendar. Because what happens is, if you've been at the parking calendar, you could have 250 people showing up at night, all who got the ticket saying be there on, this week, it'll be May the 1st. Instead of having a date by which you must appear, the ticket will be changed to a date by which you must answer. That means you could plead guilty, you could plead not guilty. And if you plead not guilty, the court will then assign you a date to come in for a conference. And if you want to have a trial at that conference, they will then assign you a trial date. This will shrink the calendars down and will also allow the Parking Violations Bureau, which is run through the court, to do their job, which is essentially take the tickets in, get the fines, and do everything that has to get done, and just set up the calendars so that on the night the calendars are heard, which is the first and third Mondays at 6 o'clock, the deputy corporation counsel or I, who's ever the prosecutor that night, can deal with those specific cases that are there, and then they can go before the judge. All the other matters will come on a date that is set. Currently, the way it works is the court tells the police department, make all the next tickets that you write returnable May the 1st. And that's what happens. Now, the tickets won't say that. The court will basically advise Dennis that the next appearance date is going to be blank. And that's what it is. So that really, and that's a court issue much more than ours. We don't have to worry about that aspect. What we're looking at now is adding these violations to the village code to put in the fee schedule, which would be another schedule, and it will be both within our code as well as within the fee schedule that we put out every year. And the fee schedule, as you'll see here, has the fine, let's call it, plus for a few violations, which are under the vehicle and traffic law, and they're really registration, there is also a surcharge. One of the advantages of bringing these under the village code is that for the violations where in the past there would have been a surcharge, there won't be a surcharge anymore. We don't have to impose that. And sometimes you would have the situation where the parking fine might be $40, but the surcharge would be $93. And so the surcharge would be more than double what the parking ticket would be. Surcharge goes, it's a state mandated charge. But if you put it under the village code, there's no state mandated charge. In other words, all this is money that ultimately the village would recognize when the tickets, are processed. So again, for our perspective, it's to get these different violations into the code. And I've initially, Mr. Farrell there were 16 violations under our code. I think I added a few extras which dealt with, basically handicap parking. I brought that over, parking, in certain districts. Abandoned vehicles will now be a section here. All of these, as I said, essentially become village code violations. And they then, if you do not timely answer, within 30 days, it's doubled. Within 60 days, it's trebled. And in 90 days, it goes up by 4. And that would be, now, important to note, at the end of the day, how much the fine is the decision of the court. We can only give them a schedule because, to be honest, one of the issues that the court has had is that there is no village fine schedule. So it's sort of like, what do we put down? This would actually set it, but at the end of the day, if the judge says, no, I think it should only be $20, then it's 20. It also does not stop the prosecutor from negotiating, particularly on folks who come in with a ream of parking tickets. And so, which happens frequently, this way you're basically cutting it down. You're also, Mr. Farrell's suggestion in terms of when to appear would be, you put in a date which is probably 15 days from the date of the ticket, but in reality, that's going to be 30 days because you're going to then give a 15-day grace period. So if you get the ticket today, it's going to say you got to answer on or before May 26th. And the answer is, I'm guilty or I'm not guilty. That's what it is. And it only goes up if, in fact, you don't respond. That's the important thing. So it lessens the calendar and it gets the things moving. So that's really what we're proposing. There's one or two sort of technical things. The assistant manager had pointed out that when we listed the parcels for some of the railroad station lots, we actually left out one parcel. So I've added that parcel back, so it's all in there. But that's basically what this local law would do. It would do that. It would give us a fine schedule. And that's really what the village needs to do. The rest will come through the court, and that's Mr. Farrell working directly with the judge and with the clerks over there, specifically from the Parking Violations Bureau end, so that they can put all that part together. So our part, again, is just changing the local law.
Who in the enforcement still is the police?
Yes, the police enforce the
Okay,
parking.
And a few civilian officers that
And
are
the
parking
PEOs,
enforcement
right, the
officers.
parking-
Yeah.
right, but that doesn't change.
Nope. Nope.
So this doesn't, okay.
And I know the chief had a question when it was first brought up last week. This does not impact moving violations. This is not vehicle and traffic. It's not, you go through a stop
No.
sign, it's not
It's the
School
snow
buses.
streets, it's the fire hydrants, it's the curves,
stop, stand and park.
right? And it's the people that park halfway into somebody's driveway so they can't get in and out, and we get calls, a lot of calls about that.
Yes.
Okay. And it's on those yellow lines that say you're not supposed to park here, that Paul puts down and people stand halfway onto them, those kind of things. It's not running a stop sign or a light or something.
No.
Okay, questions, comments?
I do have a question. I don't disagree with that concept. I don't disagree with that. I just have more like a clarification for me, sure. And Stuart, we changed our local laws in regards to the violations
Oh, no, thanks.
and regulations on the building code. We took it pretty much from the village. We took him and put him straight to the state, correct? This
Yes.
is a little bit different. This is, we're taking it from the state and we put him to the local.
That's correct. The difference is that with the building code, that's a state mandated code.
Correct.
That's a state mandated code. So we will be following that. Here, we're not, it's not as if we're changing the vehicle and traffic law. In fact, we're following it.
Yeah.
But instead of citing vehicle and traffic law section 1602 or 1640, we're going to cite village law 250-23.3 or whatever.
You also mentioned, and you know, which is, I think is for us to have clarification and to be more strict in some aspects. So like you say, you added a couple more than the
Right.
ones that were suggested, which is helpful. I guess I would like to, and obviously we don't have to talk about fines and fees or whatever this, any no subcharges anymore. But you did say that it was mentioned that the fees were a little bit low or the fines were low, but we were taking those fines from the state based on the state mandates, or how did that work more or less?
There was a schedule that basically the court set at the beginning of every calendar year. They set a schedule. And essentially what Mr. Farrell said is that if you looked at the numbers that were there, and what you see charged in other courts, we were actually quite low. I think one of the best examples, I think, dealt with the handicap parking, where the proposal here is to be $250 is the minimum fine if you're parking in a handicap space. I think currently we have it as 70 or 50, which is really low. And those numbers that we're proposing are based upon what Mr. Farrell had suggested from doing this, because he does a lot of the areas, both Hudson Valley and Long Island. So he
Gotcha.
sees these numbers.
So pretty much we're taking, I don't want to say take that away from the court, but we are eliminating that portion from the court that they were doing, function that they were doing, and we're going to be establishing that.
Right. We're establishing a fine schedule, which the court would then utilize. At the end of the day, if the judge says it's a handicap violation, but we only want to impose $75,
Totally.
that's what it is. But that would be our
Correct.
schedule.
If I get this correctly, Manny, the absence of us setting this up created a scenario where the court set up, it isn't something they want or like to do. But our absence, and I think that's why they've been discussing it, I think it's all the judges, because I think they all speak as a unit and one represents them. But I think that the idea is if we don't do something, they're forced to, and I think you explained that to me earlier today, right? They're actually forced to
Got it.
come up with something. They could pick it out of the air. It's like they decide. I think they would rather that the legislative body
Sure.
design it. And I think in some ways, I think Stuart alluded to it, but to clarify, should have been done years ago, actually, because it's not something they want to do. So I think we're doing the right thing here. I'm wondering whether it makes sense as we do rethink signage in the budget for next year, to think about also saying how much things are. If the purpose of some of this is to create behavior changes, if you have a sign, and there are areas in New York where on the handicap, and I don't know, I've never parked in the handicap, so I have no idea what it says, but it should have a handicap, and oftentimes underneath, there's a little thing that says $250 fine, and like, I gotta say, if I thought 250 versus 50, I might, think about not parking there. So it might behoove us to put some little thing under some, now I know that costs money, but if it's to change behavior, and if people do it regularly, and they're gonna go into shock and go, what? And there's not gonna be anything that says hey, we're just average, so we're not really charging so much. But I think putting things in certain places to say, I think a lot of people park in front of fire hydrants, not only in this community, but like where I work, they just figure, I'm in for 10 minutes, 15, I'm just dropping, nobody's gonna give me a ticket. I think when they realize how expensive it is, they may decide to walk an extra 2 minutes, because that's all it is to find the next spot. But it's just an idea, and I'm not
Yeah,
saying
no,
for
no,
today,
no,
and
no,
I'm
no.
not saying that's what you're asking, but I would suggest that.
Density for fires and emergencies here, I would not ever do that in Ossining.
And that's what's going to piggyback on that, because someone said this to me a while back when we were talking about that we're going to be repaving hopefully at some point, some of the areas on Spring Street and the Broad that they did and all the other stuff that not to mark what you're going to have to park, but more or less I think Stuart brought up, like fire hydrants, you have to be 30 feet from.
Yeah.
So if we're going to establish this.
Yeah, like I, for example, don't know what 30 feet look
It-
for. 30
That's
feet looks
exactly.
like.
So what exactly?
Well, it's
Red,
usually those
it's
yellow
just like
stripes
a
that you
yellow
would see.
stripe or something, and also on the corner. Sure, it's like you should not be parked
Yeah, that's
at
probably
these
a better
corners.
way to change
So I think we
behavior.
have to start.
They
you
paint the
know-
curbs sometimes too, right? Instead of marking up the nice new pavement,
Yeah,
you should go.
Yeah, they, sometimes, but I think we have to establish this. If we want to change the behavior, if we want to say, we're going to give you a fine of $250, whatever the case may be, we need to do something as well to let them know if you park here,
Yeah, there's a yellow line, you're not supposed to. It's
Yeah.
not like, oh, I thought it was fine. It's not fine.
Yeah. So,
Although I don't know if you could do it on every residential, we get complaints from residents where people in more crowded, congested areas where people smoosh in their car a little bit. So I don't know if you can go to every single driveway and
think we-
say, this
but
is
we have-
4
yeah,
feet,
we-
don't park
yeah,
here.
we have to
4 feet."
start somewhere, sure. Either we
agree with you,
mark
man.
it or we have to start publicizing whenever this gets established. Be like, okay, this is a simple PDF these are the rules and regulations and, you know,
Anyway, these are just some thoughts. It's
thank you,
not why you
Sarah.
guys
Yeah.
came in today, but just as maybe a footnote to the conversation. And maybe for next budget year, so that we can budget it in and get Paul prepared rather than say, do it today. But nevertheless, I'm in support of the request in front of us. And tell me, Mr. Farrell, what is his position and what is his?
He is in charge of FBS, who will be our vendor to deal with the parking ticket management system is the best way to put it. And he is particularly knowledgeable about the parking rules and regs that relate to Long Island and the Hudson Valley, because many of his clients are right around here. They are located in Hempstead.
Great.
And
I
so
just, there's so many Farrells in my head. that I just
he's
wanna
very,
make sure I'm getting the
very
right one.
good, and he got Sergeant McGovern involved right away, and he got the court right involved. So he's
Good.
been very good at
5 stars,
organizing.
No.
5 stars, huge
No,
improvement.
no, this is great. I have a virtual smile on. This is great. Anybody else? Did I leave anybody out of the conversation?
I'd like to say, I don't know, when he says, oh, your fines are so much lower than elsewhere, what elsewhere are we talking about? 'Cause I'm not really in favor of,
Well, I can tell you that he deals with, he's got about 25 communities on Long Island. He's got about 10, I think, in Westchester and the Hudson Valley. His experience in looking at what the fines are in all those places was that we were clearly on the low end in terms of what those numbers were. And again, the fine is, and my experience has been that we could ask for a certain fine. We don't necessarily get the fine that's imposed. It really rests with the court at the end of the day. It just does.
But I just want to make clear, the things that Stuart, or maybe Dana wants to read all 18. It's like parking in handicap zone. That's like a clear zone. And there are not many of them, and they're clearly designed for people who are handicapped. This is not just like, oh, the cop stopped someone. This is like, actually, you're in the wrong place. You're not supposed to park in front of a fire hydrant. You just are. These are for people who are blatantly breaking the law, I guess, is the only way I could put it. Some of the other ones, like you're in a bus stop, there are signs everywhere, it's a bus stop. It's not an accident that you're parking there. It's not like, gee, I didn't know. These are blatant. They're
so it's not like a lot of tickets that are written for parking on the street overnight when you're not supposed to, or your meter running out, or.
Right. So Stuart, if I may, and
Please.
there's absolutely no way I could have explained it the way that Stuart did. So he's clearly the mastermind of this here. I just play with spreadsheets. But basically to answer Trustee White's question, so for example, parking in a no parking zone, our current fine is $35. What has been suggested is $40. That's not a sizable increase. I think we've probably been at the same amount, certainly since the court consolidation, I would imagine, for many of these tickets. It's a long time ago. Where we're really talking are things that issue or things that affect immediately quality of life or public safety. So again, hindering.
Time out.
Yeah.
We keep talking about 18, just read the 18 things and the amounts, because in the time it's taking us to explain what it is, if you just read it out, I think it'll be.
Well,
You can
I don't
send-
know.
Send it to me. You don't have to read it out, but
Okay.
I just.
A bunch of them are just $5.
Okay.
There's just
You know,
a less than a
well,
handful. that are-
Scarsdale charges this, and it's like, well, I don't care what Scarsdale charges, we're not Scarsdale, you know what I mean? Like, I
No.
think, I just want to keep in mind that, a lot of people rack up a lot of money in tickets,
So
And-
I'm sorry.
them to pay them, and I just, and I'm not excusing, you're, people parking incorrectly, but, it just feels like every time you turn around, some, prices of fines going up, or tire, everything costs more, and then.
Trustee White, let me just say one thing on that. I have been in the parking calendar where people have come in owing in the 5 figures for parking tickets. I have knocked it down substantially. And the bottom line is they don't dispute that they got the tickets, and they don't dispute that they parked overnight. They don't dispute that their car's not registered. So the fact of the matter is if that happens, and it happens with some people that we all know, you negotiate it down. It simply comes into court. But I have had a few that have if you look at the fines and penalties, over $10,000. To accumulate those many tickets, that shows, to be blunt, 2 things. One, that they're violating the law consistently, and that they know they're violating the law consistently. And so we try to work with that, but it's not a matter of doing that. And I also want to point out that sometimes we have negotiated a number where the court thinks the number's too low, given the fact that there are so many tickets that have been assessed. So we do have a circumstance where we try to work with the people, particularly those who have a large number of tickets. But the fact of the matter is, there are people out there who just keep getting tickets because they simply don't care. And what then you ultimately, the ultimate stick to those folks is that they'll be labeled as scofflaws, and they won't ever be able to register the car. That's the ultimate thing that you have, that you can deal with that. But we try to work with it, but it's it's not that the fine is necessarily going up to some large number, but it's that you're trying to at least get the enforcement. The folks are writing the tickets. Maddie and I, we see the reports that come in every month in terms of the number of tickets that get written and what they get written for. I acknowledge that a vast number of tickets are for people who are parking between 3 and 6 a.m. But the fact of the matter is, the streets are all labeled. People know where they're supposed to park. They know where they're not supposed to park. And if there is an issue, they can bring it to me, or they bring it to my deputy, or they bring it to the court. But in most cases, they're just parking there and they get the ticket. And I do have people who call me and say, I'm getting the same ticket night after night after night. Well, maybe you don't park there night after night after night, or you get an overnight parking permit. I got folks who say, well, I don't want to walk, 6 or 7 blocks to my car. I can't help you. That's what the parking regulations are.
And I think just to sort of echo Stuart on that, I mean, if you look at a day in the life of a parking ticket, right? I mean, $35 or $40, it doesn't much matter. It is costing the village significantly more money to write and process that ticket than $35 or $40 or $50 or $60 or $70. This is a losing proposition for us. We're not doing it as a cash grab. We're doing it to, not to be too serious, but to keep order, right? To maintain the quality of life that we've all come to expect in this village. When you think about the parking enforcement officer or the police officer who's taking time out of their day to assess the need to write a ticket, to write the ticket, to bring it back, to have it processed through the court, to have it put on a court calendar. $35 and $40 doesn't even begin to tap into the expense of the village to write that ticket. So something else worth keeping in mind.
I just want to add, we never do every one thing you do touches on something else. We've seen that over and over. So some of the things that we're doing where we're enforcing, whether it's in lieu of fees to incentivize people to develop with parking on premises, or when you're talking about in residential areas where people have been abusing their off-street parking permit, and they really probably do have room on their property, enforcing that more strictly, looking at things more carefully to see where we can increase, we can make parking more convenient for people. So it all comes in a collective package, so that while we're doing this on one hand, there's hopefully something that's counteracting that on the other hand too. But the challenge of people doing things, particularly things that would have impact on health and safety, the cost to the entire community becomes too high. And that's what we're trying to address.
Okay, what are we being asked to do tonight with this?
What I would like is to have a resolution for next week to call for a public hearing on the proposed local law. That public hearing would then be on the, would have to be at probably for June, because we're not going to have the meeting in May. So it'll be the first Wednesday in June for the public hearing. And then if all goes well, for the board to vote on the local law at by the middle of that month.
Okay. I'm
And the
in
fee
support of
schedule
it.
too,
Anybody
right?
And the
else?
fee schedule at
Yep.
the same time, yes.
Is anybody else in support?
Good.
You're good, I'm good, you're good. Dana? Oh, lost Dana. Well, we have a majority.
Okay, we're good. Thank you.
I'm sorry, stepped away for a sec. Okay,
Next.
Okay, our last agenda item tonight. For many years, the village has been had an agreement with businesses and property owners of the Upper Crescent at the top of Main Street for garbage pickup. And this is in the lot across the street from the community center behind those stores. It's become quite problematic.
Mm,
We have issues with illegal dumping there. It became very messy. You know, we're working with the property owners and the businesses there to address the situation. Over the last few months, we've been looking at ways to, while we're putting the responsibility back on the property owners, which is their original obligation to take care of their own garbage. We've also repaved the area, and we're working with them, and we'll continue to work with them to make sure that we get on top of the illegal dumping of construction materials that happens there, because it's sort of a secluded area, as well as the fact that it's adjacent to our Croton Aqueduct. And, you know, walking by there with garbage bins overflowing isn't great for anybody, and nobody likes that. So Paul has been working on this, and there are licensing agreements that have to be made with each of the business owners. So tonight, Stuart's here to talk about one of those licensing agreements. We may have more in the future as well. But I'll let Paul Fraioli and Stuart Khan talk about that more thoroughly in more detail, and answer any questions you may have.
Paul, do you want to give more of a background as to what we're talking about?
Sure. Thanks, Stuart. Thanks, Karen. So the area that Karen was referencing is the area behind what we call the Upper Crescent, which is the addresses of, I think it's 182 through 195 Main Street, but basically the Upper Crescent from Karma Lounge all the way to the Midas building. We were having a hard time many years ago with, you know, there were thriving businesses, and underneath on the first floor of each of those buildings, and up top there were many residential units. So what was happening, not unlike a lot of Main Street, the refuse was coming out front. And then as we started to implement Westchester County's source separation laws with cardboard and commingles, it really became cumbersome to keep up with that portion of Main Street because of the density of the businesses and the residences there. And we just find ourselves perpetually picking up garbage because there wasn't really anybody following schedules. There was people coming out of the residences just leaving bags out when they were leaving their house next to the street cans, as if it was a place for them to leave waste. So we went back and forth with them. Again, this was about 15 years ago or more. And we said, look, you have to be on a dumpster program, but there was no, you know, the first blush at it was, we don't really, you know, we couldn't really get concurrence with everybody, and, you know, who needed one dumpster, who needed 10 dumpsters, you know, and everything in between. Not to mention you need dumpsters for cardboard and dumpsters for commingles as well. We decided to do a collective dumpster program back there on the village property. Right out of the gate, it was an issue. We knew it was maybe not the best solution, but it was the solution that we did at the time. And it just got worse and worse and worse with people dumping there that should not have been, regardless of signs, signage, and we monitored as best as we can. And regardless of the efforts of some of the business owners to discourage it, it just became worse and worse. And like Karen said, you know, whether it's next to the aqueduct or not, I mean, because it was there, it was so apparent that it was going on. But it was basically, it turned into a hotspot for illegal dumping. And the village wants to get out of that business. We don't, you know, it's very much effort for the guys in sanitation to keep up with it. And it was really, quite frankly, unfair. There was no return there for the dumpster fee that we were charging. We were definitely, you know, exceeding costs versus the charge. And, you know, it's hard to point a finger on who's the most egregious violator, if there was violators within the businesses, or if all the violators were coming from the outside and just using it. So we spent a lot of time working with the individual businesses, the individual property owners, and eventually it boiled down to, listen, we're not going to be in a dumpster business back here anymore. The code dictates that a commercial and residential establishment that generates that amount of waste can be made to go onto a dumpster program, whether it's private or public. We don't have to take them into the dumpster program. And we informed all of them that they will now have to coordinate with individual contractors of their choice to pick up their source separated waste. So in that vein, I started working out areas with each of them where they could possibly leave dumpsters on their private parcels or containers on their private parcels. So not everyone's going to need a license agreement, but there's a few buildings that had no rear access or rear property to have a dumpster. So those are the folks that have been coming in with, and I've introduced to Stuart to work out the license agreement that he's going to place with you tonight. And the nice thing about having individual agreements with individual companies is we don't need to go back there and deal with it anymore. The companies are going to have these businesses police it themselves. And I think that the fact that the potential for illegal dumping is now specific to a specific address, and there's going to be a property owner focusing on their dumpster versus all of the dumpsters in the back, it's going to make it a little more easy to enforce should he need to get law enforcement involved.
Thanks, Paul. And folks, two of the properties immediately that are involved are 185 and 189 Main, who are both properties owned by Frank Salsiccia. One is called, I think, TJ1 and TJ2. I've drafted a license agreement with regard to 189. At that property, there will be an encroachment onto the village property. He also wants to put up a fence, part of which would be on village property. That fence would have a gate so that the carting company could come in, pick up the dumpster, drop off the dumpster, and then leave. There are a few other properties, as Paul mentioned, also along Main that would require an agreement. If this board will recall, we already have an agreement in place with regard to Mr. Vesio's property at 195. We entered into that, I think, a year and a half ago with regard, if you remember that property, part of the issue was that a portion of the loading dock for that property was actually on village property. So we allowed a license agreement which went in there. He maintains the area. These agreements will similarly require the property owner to maintain the area that is within the village's essentially right of way or the village's property. If the village needs to get in there, the village would get in there. But they would have their own dumpsters. They would make arrangements for their own dumpsters for both garbage commingled, whatever has to be done. And as Paul said, it would take us out of the dumpster business, but would allow, where necessary, for dumpsters to be placed within certain limited areas of the village's right of way. And as I said, the first set of agreements that I will have will be for 189 and 185. 185 would just be sort of a 5-foot swath to allow a fence. 189 is a little bit larger because it's a bigger area that's involved. And as Paul also said, not all of the properties will require license agreements because not all of them will encroach. But all of them will be required, however, to have their own dumpsters. We will not be in the program anymore. We won't be doing it. They will have to arrange for their own pickup schedules with their own carting companies. But because some of it will involve village property, that's why we need a license agreement. And what I would propose is I have a draft agreement already with 189. Paul's looked it over. And I would like to have a resolution before the board next week to authorize the manager to sign that agreement. We'll be coming back to the board with other agreements as they come up. These license agreements do not include a fee because in the past, they've already paid a fee to the village for their dumpsters. But that's obviously something that's up to this board. If the board thinks that a fee is appropriate, we can put a one-time or whatever kind of fee in there. But currently, they do not include a fee. Mr. Vessio's agreement did not include a fee. So just so it's clear. And again, they would be required. The fence at 189 would be put up by the property owner. They would maintain it. They would maintain the village-owned property. They'd have to shovel it. They'd have to keep it clear. And if the village, for any reason, needed to get in there, the village would obviously have access to its own property. So that's the template that we will use for all of the other ones as well.
What happens when they don't maintain it?
If they don't maintain the license area that's within the village's property, the village would have the right to basically terminate the license agreement.
Right, and then what? I mean, I'm trying to understand the change that will occur so that there isn't garbage piling up, like the incentive for them to do the right thing.
Well, what's going to happen here is that we're not going to provide them with the dumpsters anymore.
I get that. So they'll get their private whatever,
So
and if
there's
they
some-
do a
The
good
carters will
job,
have to
that's
come in a
great.
certain number of days a week to do it. They
Right.
have to arrange for that.
So the challenge, and I'll let Paul speak to this, but we've spoken to the business owners a lot about this. It's a change and we really want to work with them. In fact, I spoke to Steve Vessio this evening. One of the things is that when they're not yours, the incentive to maintain them may be a little bit different. I think that for the most part, the different property owners are trying to do the best they can. It's not in their interest to let garbage pile up around their businesses. But we do have, it's in a pretty well-traveled area where people are walking by, and having these relegated to where they are with each individual property is probably going to make it less of an attractive nuisance for people who are deciding. A lot of the issues that we have is people, the illegal dumping. It happens anywhere you have a dumpster where people know there's a dumpster that nobody's looking at night or something. It happens all over the village. So it's something that it's going to be a process. I don't think this is the magic wand solution, but we are going to be working with the business owners and property owners, and this is just probably the biggest step forward in trying to address the issue that we have in that area. Paul, I don't know if you want to expand on that, please.
Sure. Before I do though, I want to thank Stuart for going through this effort, because it is extraordinary putting it in place. It's very time consuming, I know, but it's going to be, the end game is going to be wonderful. Second, I want to give 2 kudos out to the sanitation crews. One for the crews that have been dealing with really the most disrespectful and egregious dumping condition in the village for all these years. And whenever they left there, it was spotless, only to go back a few days later and it was full. And we just kept putting up with that and putting up with that and hoping that it would turn around and we could keep dealing with it. But it finally reached its breaking point. And it's one of the things I started talking about with the manager the day she started here. This is something we have to deal with. So I appreciate that. The second is, if you walk back there in the last couple of days, you could see the actual transformation effort that those same crews put into this area. Not only did he clean it out and remove ourselves out of the collection business back there, but they repaved everything. They did a lot of masonry work on the walls. They put up a nice split rail fence, and they really made it look like what's been going on back there for the last 15 years never even happened. So I think, the whole area has transformed, and I'm confident that it might not be perfect right out of the box, like Karen said, but in time, as people adjust to having their own dumpsters, and you have private dumpster companies telling them that this is your dumpster and you need to take care of it. That's another layer of police, if you will, that will assist our code enforcement and police efforts. They're going to be also policed by the carting companies, because they're not going to be able to leave it out the way they left it out for village employees all those years. They're going to have to make sure it's in a dumpster with the top down, without, acting like a magnet for everybody else's waste, or the dumpster companies aren't going to deal with it. So it'll find its own way to success. But again, so much better than what was back there. And with the things that we have on the canvas back there for the future, including the parking and the enhanced trails and the things we're doing at Caputo Center, we really needed to rid that area of this condition, and we did. So I appreciate that.
Okay, so thank you, Paul. Who's ultimately responsible for this, the business or the landlord?
The landlord's responsibility, the
Okay,
property owner.
The property owner, excuse me. I shouldn't say landlord, property owner. Okay. Anybody? We're good for thumbs up or? Okay,
Just one question, I guess,
Please.
in regards to screening. Is anything that we can add to screening to do this? Because obviously they can put whatever they want, sure, but can we standardize this to be something more suitable and more durable?
Yeah. Well, as far as screening along the aqueduct, Paul has given some thought to that. So Paul, maybe you want to talk about how we're working on camouflaging the business dumpsters and just sort of beautifying that area in a sense.
Okay, so we did do some paving back there, and we reparged the masonry walls, and we're going to do some striping to prevent people from parking back there. I mean, they're going to use it for loading and unloading, but they're really not supposed to be parking there. That is a village parking lot, but there's no spaces there per se, because we leave it there open so they have access to the back of their buildings. But we're going to have to, we're going to have to police that area to make sure that doesn't happen and you don't have that eyesore. With regard to screening for beautification, we did put up the split rail fence, and I talked to Bill a little bit about his crews going in there and doing some plantings. There's not a lot of area to plant. Most of it's paved. There's a little green strip between the aqueduct and the actual parking lot, but we do have utilities under there that are used to energize the decorative light posts on the aqueduct. But he's got some ideas. I told him to wait till we get out of there, which literally we just finished the other day. So I'm sure he's going to be in there soon enough, kind of thinking about that. As far as screening, where the property owners now have the responsibility of containers against the back of their building. I know the one applicant that we're talking about tonight is going to put up a fence for screening and for illegal dumping, try to thwart that. And, the other folks are going to be asked to do the same as they come in to, keep the dumpster area clean. Will there be an exposed dumpster in the back of a commercial lot? That's highly likely. Will you be able to see it? Yeah, probably in some cases, but to that extent, that's kind of like the nature of that type of area. You can screen it as best as you can, but you have a parking lot that abuts right up against the property line of a building, which has very limited setback in a lot of areas.
No, and I totally understand that. What I'm saying is screening more like to standardize the screening. I will hate to see different property owners come in and do, this is the cheaper way for me to do this. And it's just a mismatch of things that exactly, it just becomes a mess. So we should just say, look, this is the type of screening that you have to use. That's it. So we can just kind of standardize some of the stuff, at least in the back, if that's something that we can do.
The difficulty, Paul, I apologize. The difficulty may be that for some of these property owners, it's all on their property. So we're not really in a position to say on your property, this is what, to the extent that, for example, the property owner we're talking about tonight, that's going to encroach on the village property. That's one thing. But for some of these property owners, there's no encroachment at all.
Got it.
So to the extent that we could make a recommendation to try to follow sort of the line, that we can certainly do.
Yeah.
But I don't think we're in a position to say it's got to be that way because it's not there. It's not our
That's
property.
fine. I understand that.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think we should just, yeah, exactly. I think we should sort of like, look, there's other municipalities and I'm just gonna say, like, the signage has to be this kind of color, this type of stuff. They literally, they only have two options.
Kisco did that. You don't have a lot of choices.
I know, I was gonna say monkeys go Chappaqua, sort of that kind of stuff, but I just didn't want to.
Kisco downtown did it and there was a
Yeah,
lot
But
of
that's, again,
people were
so
upset,
this.
but it works.
Yeah, so if we, at least, I'm not talking about awnings, I'm not talking about any of that stuff. I'm talking about a fence that's gonna be, look, at some point in time, we are gonna be developing the site not too far from there with parking. And we're trying to promote a lot of the walking portion of here. So for me, trying to standardize this now, it avoids problems in the future. And how do we struggle with that? That's all.
One of the advantages with this particular group is it's a somewhat cohesive group of building owners and business owners who have known each other for some time. I think there is interest in us being able to have a conversation of look and feel, and we're all everyone involved in this discussion is in agreement that we have to improve the way that looks, and the better it looks, the less of an attractive nuisance it is for people who are dumping or anything else. So I think through conversations, we could probably, it's a relatively contained group of people. I think we've opened the door to those conversations. I think, Paul, and I'll update you, I spoke to Steve Vesio this evening. I think there is interest. They still have, everybody still has concerns and wants to know how things are going to work and what's going on. But I think that, it also speaks of another issue that we have, a lot of issues with quality of life where, any violation really is a building code violation, but these violations probably happen at 3 o'clock in the morning or 5 o'clock in the morning when nobody's around. So it is, I did speak to Chief Sylvester too about, making sure that, on patrol, that these are areas that we're looking at, that, if it's signage, which again, people, if they know they're not going to get caught, ignore it. But that doesn't mean that one night a code enforcement officer may not be around if we understand that people are coming at a certain time. So, I think there's things that we could do to deter those who are coming and abusing it. My sense is from most of the property owners, though, they are very on board with enhancing the look and feel.
Good for
And
them,
we're
yeah.
just going to continue because, they're renting to people, the aqueducts, and that the aqueduct's a selling point for them too. And if it looks better, that's something that they can, when you're renting, that's an amenity. Being close to a newly renovated state-of-the-art community center is an amenity. Like there's things that we're providing a value to. So I think we can find the common ground there. And I'm hoping that this is an opportunity to open that door with other businesses too. So we really do have this mutually responsible idea, because garbage on the street, not just on Main Street, on Croton Avenue, anywhere we have, anywhere we have pickups on cardboard day, it's, depending on the business, it's problematic. And, everybody's trying to do the best they can, but I think there's ways we can figure out better solutions, despite the fact that some people don't have rear yards to do things, we're getting there. We're definitely getting there.
Okay. Anything else you need?
Can I add one thing? This is I know this is really just about the license agreement, but Karen interjected the entire program there. We are gonna use this as a catapult into looking at all the other areas too. We might not talk about them a lot, but there are a lot of areas in the village that kind of
Yeah.
you know, especially when the housing started turning around and then we started getting the densities back of 10 and 20 years ago. A lot of areas have become that aren't on the dumpster program, generating a lot of waste that maybe should be. And then there's areas that are on the dumpster program that, you know, maybe they don't have to be, depending on, you know, so we're looking at all that. But the overriding mantra is get the stuff out of the eyesight of the general population as quick as you can and as safely as you can. We pick up Main Street every morning at 6:30 in the morning. We change the schedules just to facilitate that, to get that all out. But there's other areas in the village though, where there is a lot
Yeah.
of, whether it be cardboard, commingle, or our
Mhm.
general bulk and household waste, that really put a lot of material in front of these houses. And we've used that as a, in many cases in the past, and we'll start doing it again, to generate a little interest by the building department to go look at the actual occupancy of a building versus what the, you know, maybe the tax cards indicate because of the amount of waste that's coming out of these houses. So we don't want to do it just to put them on a dumpster program. We want to use it for, you know, to benefit the overall area.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Good points. All right, I think we're done. Anything else?
We do not.
Okay.
We have a motion to adjourn to executive session for a matter of litigation.
All those in favor?
So moved. Do you move?
Second.
Aye.
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 Thank you.
Folks, it's 10 o'clock. Thank you for joining us. We're on again next week. And we'll see you there. We're going into exec. Yes, has Dana been given?
Yes.
Great. Have a good evening.